All right, here goes. Thanks for showing up. Welcome to Truth, Mind, Reality, the first conference put together by Ivan Oyola, Free Your Mind AZ. All right, like many of you, I am one of you. So it's not like any of the people that are going to be speaking today are movie stars, superstars, or millionaires, or anything like that, as far as I know. I know I'm not. But like many of you, hopefully many of you, and some of you guys are just starting, it's been about 10 years that I started what they call waking up, or the path to truth, or whatever you want to call it. Just getting sick of how things were. But right now, I'm getting close to 50, late 40s. So I was in my late 30s and living like everybody else, working in debt, married, divorced, child support, just what the American dream, I guess, right? So, but it's funny how just like a little thing can change everything. And for me, it was Kevin Trudeau. I don't know if you guys remember back in the 2000s. 2000. Well, I know through the 90s and the 2000s. But I remember staying up at night one time, switching through the channels and seeing a commercial for debt cures they don't want you to know about. So I was like, yeah, I'm in debt. I don't know any cures, so let me order this. Ordered the book, received the book, read through it, really didn't retain anything. But it came with a CD, an audio CD called 25 Secrets to Wealth Creation. So I listened to that CD, and there were a lot of things in there that I never heard before. Basically, you can call it like new agey kind of stuff, but principles of teachability indexes and all this stuff. I was like, I never heard this mentioned before. So that, and he recommended some books. So I started looking up those books, went to the library, picked up audiobooks, and one thing led to another. And around 2007, that's when I started what you can call my journey or my awakening. So I went through like new age stuff, metaphysical stuff, then got into consciousness stuff. And then found the Zeitgeist movie. How many of you have seen the Zeitgeist movies? Cool, there we go. So yeah, and then one thing leads to another. And then I get to David Icke, and I get to a few other people, Michael Tsarian, all the familiar names. And then I get to Mark Passio, and that's the one, that starts, he doesn't pull any punches, for those of you who know him. So, yeah, and he starts talking about, hey, to know and not to do is not to know or not to care. So some of you know I work at the post office, and I spend most of my time with the headphones on, listening to podcasts or audiobooks and all that kind of stuff. So all that information starts accumulating, and I'm your regular person. I don't have any PhD or any college time under my belt. So I'm just processing this information, and after a while, all that starts accumulating, and I start looking at the world differently. And it gets to a point, again, after listening to Mark Passio, that's like, okay, you have all this knowledge or this information, what do you do with it? So around 2012, I started a website, I started a meetup group. Not shortly after that, started doing a little podcast once in a while, and all that was fine. I started attending conferences here and there, and I started noticing that for me, I haven't seen anything like what I've seen in other places like Philadelphia with the Free Your Mind conference and stuff. I didn't see that here. So after a while, maybe somebody should do that. And a lot of us say that. Somebody should do that. Lori, you should go ahead and do a conference. Scott, you should do something. And it's like, that's the problem. We're always saying, somebody should do that, somebody should do that. Well, guess what? That somebody is us, Because I was sitting there, and now I'm up here. And my voice will start trembling a little, and maybe the nerves. But hey, we got to just work through it. And look at, we're here. And this took about a year to put together for me, but the idea goes back to maybe 2013. I was in Connecticut at Mark Passio's natural law seminar, and way back then I mentioned to him I had an idea for putting something together with the words truth, mind, reality. And now look, even had a little logo made and all that stuff. So ideas, yeah. So that's a prime example of a little bit like new age stuff, your thoughts, put in some effort, you manifest it, becomes a reality. And not only in the material stuff like this, cardboard and paper, but look, now I have about 7 or 9 people here that I was able to bring in to share ideas, and that's another type of manifestation. Some of you may already know what they're going to speak about, and some of you never heard of any of that. Some of you might know about vaccine stuff. Some of you might know about chemtrail stuff. Some of you might know about 9/11. But some of you might not know how all this stuff in one way or another is connected. And that's the idea. And that's why the subcaption says, comprehending how humanity manifests its living condition. Because a lot of us don't comprehend. We just think, make the money, everything else will be fine. Go to church and pray, everything will be fine. You know, pay your taxes, everything will be fine. But we don't comprehend how doing those things alone, that manifests a certain type of reality. All right? And so hopefully with this day, if you stay the whole day and catch most of the speakers and put everything together, you'll start seeing how each of us are responsible for the way things are in the world. If you like it and you think everything's fine, okay. But if you see some problems, it's like, hey, maybe we're the ones that need to do something about it and stop giving our power away. We hear that all the time. So let me look at the time, 9:14. I'll be back up here introducing each of the speakers as they come up. I'll try and keep to the time schedule so we can go through the day. We're going to have lunch at noon, I believe. Let me break out the schedule. And then a dinner about 4:45. We have little list at the registration table of local places you can go to eat. There's places down on 59th and Thunderbird, more places up on Bell Road and 59th. And hopefully this can start like a little community. We're not trying to divide and conquer here or anything like that. Start working together. So if some people don't have a ride and you're interacting with someone, even some of the speakers, and when it gets close to lunchtime and you're going someplace, ask around. Anybody need a lift? Anybody need to go out to get something to eat? And, you know, help each other out. And that's part of how you start bringing down the walls, the barriers, and start, you know, building those bridges. All right? So I think that's pretty much it for now. And so the first speaker for today is going to be Steve Cohn. And I'm not going to give too much of details about him. All the information's on the websites, links to their Facebook pages and all that stuff. But Steve Cohn is an activist out of ASU doing the 9/11 architects and engineers for 9/11 truth stuff. So let me make sure I turn on the equipment here.
It has to warm up.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, that's pretty much it for me, and I'll be around. Any questions? All right, thanks. All right. You know how to do everything? You good?
I think so.
All right. And the audio will play, but they'll edit the audio in later for the video. All right. Steve Cohn.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for being here. And can we get one more round of applause for Ivan and Free Your Mind AZ for putting this event on? Certainly a tough endeavor pulling off an event like this, and I give you props. My talk is going to be about 9/11 and the evidence that there were explosives that were used to knock down the Twin Towers and also the third tower, Building 7. But before I get started, I'd like to take a quick survey. Will you please raise your hand if you've already heard of Building 7, the third tower that I just mentioned? And just keep them hold. We're going to try to take a quick count, so if you can, just hold them up. And I don't know, what do you think, like 50 people? And then how many of you didn't know that there was a third tower until I just said it, pretty much? Okay, cool. So I'm going to be focusing on the strongest evidence that the third tower and also the Twin Towers were knocked down with explosives inside that were planted there in advance. And then also I'm going to briefly touch on the 9/11 truth movement itself. Let's see. And for what it's worth, I'm not a professional speaker, or this is pretty much my first time doing this, so please bear with me. I'm going to mostly let some videos do all the hard work for me. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about, the 3 best points of evidence and the brief history of the truth movement. The truth movement started out by the families of the victims who weren't comfortable with the government's explanation of the way the towers fell and just the whole story behind it. And these girls in this movie, 9/11 Press for Truth, they're called the Jersey Girls or the Jersey Widows, and they got together and actually pressured George Bush and Cheney to form the 9/11 Commission, which didn't form until 2003, but it wouldn't have formed at all if the victims' family members weren't leading the charge. So we definitely owe them a debt of gratitude for continuing the truth movement. And also this man down in the bottom left, his name is Bob Mcilvain. His son Bobby was killed in the Twin Towers, and his body was discovered in the rubble pile. And the coroner told him that he can be assured that explosives killed him and not a collapse of any sort. So before I'd like to get started, at this time, if we can, I'd like to take a brief moment of silence to honor the heroes and the victims of that day. All right, thanks. It's important to remember when we're talking about these buildings and the way that they came down, that there were people inside of them, and we shouldn't lose that human aspect. This is a major tragedy, no matter how it happened. So we just want to get to the truth. Now, if you will, I'd like you to try to imagine a building on fire, and for some reason this building collapsed. And I'd like you to imagine that the fire was the cause of the collapse, so these fires were probably really hot, but what would the building look like falling? How fast would it be? Would it be slow and warping, or would it be instantaneous and symmetrical? And then imagine that an explosion or a demolition was used to knock down a tower. And imagine, if maybe you've all seen that on TV, and so it's easy for you to imagine. And think of some characteristics of the way it comes down. And you guys might have thought of some of these characteristics. Fire is asymmetrical, random, and unpredictable. And the main thing with fire is that the steel inside still provides upward resistance. It resists the force, or the force of the falling building from above. And therefore, it shouldn't be falling as fast as a bowling ball off of the side of the building. Whereas with a demolition, you cut all the steel beams at the same time in order to have a building fall straight down without damaging the surrounding buildings. And this is what the third tower looked like. I'm sorry. This is what witnesses on the day of 9/11, witnesses and reporters said,
in a deeper sense,
as they were watching it on live TV.
In a religious sense, a myth serves as an orienting and mobilizing story for a people. The focus is not on the story's relation to reality, but on its function. A story cannot function unless it is believed to be true in the community or the nation. It is not a matter of debate. If some people have the bad taste to raise the question of the truth of the sacred story, the keepers of the faith do not enter into debate with them. They ignore them or denounce them as blasphemers.
It is wrong, blasphemous, and sinful for you to suggest, imply, or help other people come to the conclusion that the U.S. government killed 3,000 of its own citizens.
as if a demolition team set off when you see the old demolitions of these old buildings.
It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being purposely dynamited and blown up.
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under-infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
The way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
The building collapsed to dust. You don't find a desk. You don't find a chair. You don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half of the keypad, and it was about this big.
What happened to the concrete?
The concrete was pulverized from river to river. There was dust powder 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
Reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
If they had detonated, planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
I heard a second explosion.
There was a heavy-duty explosion.
Then there was some secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
It sounded like gunfire. Bang, 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 bang. And then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
We heard a big explosion coming down.
And then the entire top of the building just blew up.
We saw some kind of explosion.
By the force of the explosions.
Big explosion. Blew it back into the 8th floor.
Then we get to the lobby. This is a big explosion.
The lobby looked as though a bomb had exploded there.
A huge explosion now, raining debris.
It's been a huge explosion.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We just witnessed some kind of follow-up explosion. We heard a very loud blast explosion.
The secondary explosion at Tower 1 camp.
That is another bomb going off. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
So that is the start of the Zeitgeist 9/11 part, which Ivan was mentioning earlier. A lot of people woke up from the movie Zeitgeist. Woke up to 9/11, I should say. So moving on. So the 3 key points of evidence that I'd like to talk about today is the downward acceleration of the rooftop. And in the case of Building 7, the downward acceleration was literally the acceleration of gravity or free fall. Second is the molten metal at ground zero, which indicates extremely high temperatures. And third is high-tech explosives discovered in the World Trade Center dust. And I think that all 3 of these points, there are a lot of evidence that points to demolition with explosives, but I think these are the 3 points that I would describe as the solid proof. And first of all, I think this is the Building 7 video. This is what Building 7 looked like. It's a silent video. It was a 47-story high skyscraper that was part of the World Trade Center. It was called World Trade Center Building 7. In 33 U.S. states, it would have been the very tallest building. 5:20 p.m. on the same day, it collapsed into its own footprint at the rate of free fall speed without being hit by a plane. Suffered minor damage from debris crashing into it from the North Tower collapse. But the government's official report is that only normal office fires made it fall, and no explosives were used at all, even though it looks exactly like other examples of a controlled demolition, and even though that no fire has ever knocked down a steel-framed high-rise skyscraper like Building 7. So now you guys have a visual, if you didn't before. And this is the North Tower. I'm only going to show a piece of this video.
The starting point in science is observation. What you are seeing here is what happened to the North Tower of the World Trade Center, the second of 3 buildings to collapse on 9/11/2001. I use the word collapse, but words can be deceptive. What do you really see happening here? There's a tremendous amount of falling debris, but under the canopy of debris, do you see the rapid sequence of explosive ejections of material? Some of the jets have been clocked at over 100 miles per hour. I will call them explosions because it's hard to find other words that describe what we are seeing here. The explosions are not isolated and few. They are continuous and widespread. They move progressively down the faces of the building, keeping pace with the falling debris. Perhaps you can imagine a natural cause, but I can't. Notice that the explosions are occurring on multiple floors at once, over a wide zone, not in a floor-by-floor sequence that might be explained by pancaking collapse. Notice there are explosions far below the point of collapse. Some are isolated and focused. These are often referred to as squibs and are commonly seen in controlled demolitions. However, this is not a standard controlled demolition. The building is being progressively destroyed from the top down by waves of explosions, creating a huge debris field. The destruction is in waves, not just in one wave. Most obvious is a rapid sequence of explosions near the visible corner of the building. But simultaneously we can see another wave of explosions much further down the face of the building under the canopy of falling debris. Notice that both waves of explosions progress down the face of the building, nearly keeping pace with the falling debris just a few feet away. Slabs of concrete did not fall to the ground and smash to dust. There is almost no concrete in the rubble pile. Notice that the concrete is being forcefully ejected outward from the sides of the building, already pulverized to dust. Notice that embedded in the dust clouds are huge girders and entire sections of steel framing that are being hurled out of the building. The horizontal speed of some of the girders has been clocked at over 70 miles per hour.
All right, so we don't have time for the whole thing. It's just a constant loop. But the man narrating is David Chandler. He's one of the leading 9/11 physics researchers. He was a physics teacher, and he was the man who actually proved that the third tower, Building 7, fell at free fall speed. And he forced the government to change their final report, actually, to admit that. So moving on to the second point. Extremely high temperatures at ground zero. These are just a couple of photos of the rubble pile, and what you're seeing is basically steel that is yellow hot. And here, there's a scale of what color of the steel, and then the temperature of the steel. So some of this is like, close to white hot, up to like approaching 2,000 degrees. Well, the problem with that is this is days after the attack in the rubble pile, and 2,000 degrees is hotter than fires can reach naturally, and it is even hotter than a fire with jet fuel. So these extremely high temperatures need an explanation, but the government, rather than explain that phenomenon, have simply denied it repeatedly. And so this is an overhead satellite view, and so at different points at ground zero, there were hot spots. This is taken 5 days after 9/11, and there were hot spots under towers 1, 2, and 7, reaching very high temperatures that have not been explained. And this is video evidence of the government openly denying this evidence. And this is about an 8-minute video, and it's number 3 out of there's about 5 videos I've got lined up. So. Before I get into it, Nist, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they are the ones that oversee the fire and explosion investigations. They basically write all the regulations for fire departments around the country. So they're supposed to be physics and chemistry and fire experts. And they were in charge of investigating the collapse.
This field for any of those residents?
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it. I was on the site, I was on the steel yards, so I don't know that that's so.
There's video of it.
Melted around 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it's probably pretty difficult to get that kind of temperatures in a fire. So I don't know the basis. I can't address your question if I don't know the basis.
Well, NASA pictures, thermal images showed those sorts of temperatures in the basement.
Would you send them to me?
Okay.
My name is Mark, and I'm the individual who was questioning Dr. Gross, and he asked me to email to him those thermal images. When I approached him after his talk to get his email address for that purpose, he refused to provide it to me. I think this is important because it reveals the attitude of the Nist investigators, which is one of willful ignorance of what really happened on 9/11.
Hello. Hi, Mr. Gross?
Speaking.
Yeah, my name's Jeffrey Hill. The reason I was calling you, sir, was because I was just looking at a video where you were talking about Ground Zero. You said in that video that there was no witnesses or reports to molten metal at Ground Zero?
Actually, no, I didn't, but go ahead.
Well, I just watched the videos right here. You did say that.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so.
I was just wondering, well, are you still saying that there was no reports or witnesses to molten metal at Ground Zero?
You're certainly welcome to contact our public affairs people to bring any questions you want to NISP. Why don't you call Mike Newman?
Well, I'm just wondering because I just got off.
Mike Newman.
Well, sir, I just got off the phone with a guy from the NYPD who was down there at Ground Zero for a week.
Look, I'm not here to discuss it with you. If you have a question, call our public affairs office.
Well, you say you're wrong with what you said, or what?
The National Institute for Standards and Technology said that there's no witnesses to molten metal and there's no reports of molten metal from Ground Zero.
That's bullshit. That's a load of shit. Not only was it molten metal, but there were beams that got so hot that they were bent. And they weren't bent. These beams couldn't have bent without being heated up. Beams that were 2 inches thick. You can't just bend a 2-inch thick steel beam. They had to have been bent. They had to have been heated up in order to bend. All I can tell you is what I'm telling you. I was there, and what I saw is what I'm telling you.
But you know for a fact, there was molten metal down there?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. Now, I don't know if it was steel beams that were melted, but there was molten metal down there. I don't know what it was from. There were big clumps of melted metal down there that I saw.
And you saw with your own eyes, melted metal down there?
Yes, absolutely. Not only did I, but other guys that I was with.
So there's multiple witnesses to this molten metal globs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So then NIST has to be lying 100% when they said there was no reports or no witnesses of this because you're a witness yourself.
I don't know what they said. Maybe they are. I have no idea. I don't even know who they are.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like lava from a
volcano. The fires got very intense down there and actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
And almost like a chunk of lava from Kilauea or Iceland, where they're very sharp but breakable shards on the end here.
This 8-ton steel I-beam is 6 inches thick. It was selected to be preserved for future generations for the near-perfect horseshoe-like bend formed during the collapse.
I found it hard to believe that it actually bent because of the size of it and how there's no cracks in the iron. It bent without almost a single crack in it. It takes thousands of degrees to bend steel like this.
Typically, you'd have buckling and tearing on the tension side, but there's no buckling at all.
You saw steel, some of the thickest steel I've ever seen, bent like a pretzel. And you just couldn't imagine the force that took. The grapplers were pulling stuff out, big sections of iron that were literally on fire on the other end. They would hit the air and burst into flames, which was pretty spooky to see.
There was even a point where you would create an air pocket by moving steel, fueling the fires underground, would ignite cars, and cars would just blow up. But, you know, these underground fires were just like the fires of hell.
This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was the core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it was just a bright, reddish orange color. See that stuff he's pulling out? What was that, Chief? We're gonna hold off on the water. See the stuff he's pulling out? Yeah. It's red hot. If we hit it too much steam, you won't be able to see what he's doing. Great.
You see how this debris is still smoking? That's from the fires that are still burning. 8 weeks later, we still got fires burning. Every now and then, one of the pieces of equipment will dig in, they'll open up a small area, the oxygen will rush in, and you'll get this plume of brown, black smoke coming up. That's because that fire just got more oxygen. So, I mean, these things are burning. At one point, I think they were about 2,800 degrees.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall from Building 6.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground.
And all of a sudden, he comes out of this little tunnel screaming, "Wait till you see what I found." And he pulls in ministers and officials, and there, this cross is fully extended, melted together with the intense heat. The two beams were never initially part of the same structure. Heat literally melted them together. And the piece of metal that's draped over was molten metal that had literally fallen over one of the arms.
Steel-toed boots is one of the biggest things.
Steel-toed boots?
Steel-toed boots. Out still on the rubble, it's still, I believe, 1,100 degrees. The guy's boots just melt within a few hours.
Go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, and no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it. I was on the site, I was on the steel yards, so I don't know that that's so.
So raise your hand if you believe that guy. So there were a lot of witnesses to the molten metal, and Nist still refuses to acknowledge it. Continuing on with the theme of extremely high temperatures. All right. Okay, yeah. I'll get to that next. So another example, and I've got to blaze through because I'm not going to get to finish, but iron microspheres were found in chemical testing of the dust. Iron microspheres is formed in extremely high temperatures. Basically, it's like liquefied steel, like when that has been turned into a mist, like you spray a water bottle. And this is a scientific report published on that. Now there was this was an article published in an open chemical physics journal. This is the only peer-reviewed paper written about the chemical analysis of the dust. And this team of international scientists discovered that there were elements of this chemical called thermite, which is one of the only known chemical reactions that can get hot enough to melt steel. And tons of these little chips were discovered in the dust, and no one has challenged that paper. Okay. So I'm just going to try to wrap it up. So there's a lot. 9/11 is a very complex, large-scale event. There's history behind it. There's many different aspects that I could sit up here and talk for a half hour easily on each one of these aspects. But you know, I do encourage all of you to do your own research and find some of these answers for yourself. The information is out there, just not in the mainstream media. And before I go, I just want to play one quick video of some activism of local activists, including me, who were interviewed by the USA Today. And this, they actually published an article in the sports section of the paper 2 days before the Super Bowl, because we were rooting for the Seattle Seahawks because their coach is a conspiracy theorist. So here's that video.
All the conspiracy theories at this Super Bowl have focused on Deflategate, but there's another conspiratorial subplot involving Seahawks coach Pete Carroll's reported interest in the 9/11 truth movement. A Deadspin report in 2013 claimed Carroll grilled retired Army General Peter Chiarelli about 9/11 conspiracy theories during a meeting, and he followed that with some skeptical comments in the Seattle Times. This week he won't just have the 12th man's backing, but also a group of Arizona Truth Movement members.
I mean, he became kind of an instant celebrity in the 9/11 truth movement because he's a dude who obviously is smart. I mean, he's just won the Super Bowl, he might win it again. And I think people can connect with someone at that level. They think, wow, if this guy has his opinion, then maybe I could have that opinion too.
It's certainly great to have someone of his stature talk about something such as this. Any notoriety is great, and I'm glad that he is able to provide it.
Carroll has other things on his mind this week, trying to win another ring, but he still gave a brief answer at Media Day, suggesting his skepticism was not yet completely satisfied.
There's an Arizona 9/11 Truth Movement Society who've adopted you as their favourite coach and Seahawks as their favourite team.
Any notoriety is good, I guess.
Is there something you're still interested in?
Well, I'll always be interested in truth.
We definitely think that that's what Pete Carroll is essentially doing, is throwing the challenge flag on the official story that we've heard so far. Basically, we don't want this to end up as another Fail Mary.
Last year's Super Bowl saw the unlikely scene of Malcolm Smith's MVP speech being interrupted by a 9/11 truth advocate, something that caught the Seahawks defensive star completely unawares.
There was a guy who kind of had a phony security badge, and he kind of just trailed me up to the podium, and he was like, "Are you ready to speak?" And I was like, "Yeah." He jumps up there and does his little spiel. And
that interview invader was New York man Matt Mills, who grabbed the mic on live TV to claim that 9/11 was the work of forces within the US government.
Really, my memory from last year is that Investigate 9/11 was trending worldwide the next day, and I'm pretty proud to have helped make that happen.
Seahawks fans will likely outnumber Patriots supporters come Sunday, and Seattle, thanks to Carroll, will also have the support of a group that admires his reported curiosity.
He's definitely who I'm rooting for at the Super Bowl this year, which is ironic because I consider him a true patriot.
So, yeah, so these are some other active 9/11 truth groups. You might, no one's laughing, so I guess you don't see the magicians for 9/11 truth. They're actually a pretty funny group. I think their tagline is, "We know an illusion when we see it." These are some of the whistleblowers and heroes that have continued the 9/11 truth movement. Indeed, thank you. This is a list of some of the many, many full-length DVD documentaries that exist out there that you can watch and learn more about the 9/11 events. And we're just going to have to skip this one. But on the day of 9/11, Donald Trump was suggesting that the towers had to come down with explosives also. So that's my time. Thank you all for your attention. And I'd like to welcome back Ivan.